Probably, probably the most heartbreaking thing about the Ruby Franke story. I imagine probably what's going to happen here is that she's going to try and lay all of the blame on Jody Hildebrant because she was using all of the same language that Jody Hildebrand was using. But you need to be humble. Um, all that bullshit, right? These were her kids. These were innocent children that were being corrupted by primarily their mother, but the father was certainly enabling the situation too, which is probably why he does not have custody of the kids right now and they're actually in foster care. Like the authorities at this point, it seems like they don't know who they can trust to actually take care of these kids. And they've obviously been severely abused. Not just by having their lives exposed on um, social media, on YouTube, but also the severe punishment for clicks. For clicks, Ruby? This woman needs to rot in prison. This is so disgusting. And it's so sad to hear this call over and over again because I've heard it now on several different like this is being covered all over the place, right? And every one of us who is a parent is like horrified, absolutely horrified, because we all know that we've made mistakes, but like to the abuse that was going on in this household is amazingly off the charts. And yeah, like some of the neighbors said that they thought they were going to see these kids come out in body bags.
And damage, and he's getting raked over the coals by all of this.
Now, many of you guys think the dad's responsible,
yes,
and should be charged as well. And I'm curious what you guys think. Put a 1 in the chat if you say yes.
Well, on top of it, I think that the whole reason that this is my assumption, allegedly, I think he had to leave the household because Ruby started having some sort of affair with Jody, because they appear to me like a lesbian couple. I'm making an assumption here. I don't know if it's true. But it seems very odd that you would give the ability to discipline your children so severely to somebody that you were not in a romantic relationship with. Very bizarre to me.
Dad's responsible. He needs to have some charges as well. Because a lot of the videos we were watching, the dad was still in the home. Put a 2 in the chat if you're like, no, he's independent of her.
No.
Hey, Miss Michelle, thank you so much.
They were getting calls. They were getting CPS calls for 3 years. That means that 2 of the years that they were getting CPS calls against them, he was in the home. So no, he should not have custody of these kids either.
For that super chat, guys, we are 5 super chats away from reaching our goal. We got about 10 minutes left, so we can do it still. Got about 10 minutes left on this hour. Hopefully we can get there. Jennifer Swain says, choo-choo, the little train that could.
When in fact, he himself was to some degree a victim of these psychological and mental manipulations that were perpetrated against him and his family by Jody. He's just trying to restore some normalcy in his life and make sure that he can, as was his goal all along, to keep this family together and make sure that they thrive and that they recover from this abuse.
Now, I am sure there is more to this story. And
Yeah, how is that even possible? You have 3 of the kids are in bondage at Jody Hildebrand's house. What happened to the 4th kid, by the way? Obviously, she had a favorite, apparently. And then the other 2 were, I guess, one of them is living with Kevin, the father. Chad is. And one of them is off at Brigham Young University attending college. I guess she's the oldest, probably, right? So, what, you have like one fucking favorite, Ruby?
will develop. We'll, of course, continue to follow all this for you and bring you every new detail. That's all we have.
Oh, God.
Okay, let's go over to the Nancy Grace episode and just see what's cracking on that.
For those of you who haven't watched Nancy Grace before, she's been around since like the 90s at least. And she covered, she used to be on Core TV. I think she covered the O.J. Simpson trial. I can't remember. I know she definitely covered the Michael Jackson stuff. And she used to cover all these cases for Court TV. But she's a little over the top dramatic, which isn't exactly helpful in these cases of making it seem like it's a soap opera rather than a real problem, right? And I think that kind of coverage actually hurts the situation rather than helps, because if you have somebody acting like it's a fucking melodrama, then you lose your public opinion on that. But fortunately, I think the legal system is going to handle this.
Join me, Judge Janine.
Let's just pray for those kids too. Lord, we just thank you that you're close to the brokenhearted and you protect. You're a protector. And you're actually all we need. You're all any of us need, Jesus. As long as we got you, we have all that we need. And so, Lord, I pray right now that those children actually will watch this heartbreaking case, find you, the real version of you, in the midst of all of this. Even as that one, the youngest girl, was praying to you just to survive. Lord, I pray you capture her heart in a way that she doesn't just survive, but she thrives. So we bless these kids, Lord, I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, Catherine Joy, thank you so much for that super sticker. Amazing, amazing support. We are 4 away from our goal.
Okay.
Incredibly famous YouTuber, a mommy vlogger, Ruby Franke, her family now says she should be, quote, put away in jail forever. Really?
Yeah.
You're saying that now? Well, where were you when her children, and this is a mommy vlog.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, they were literally making the phone calls. They were trying to get police involved. I have personally been dealing with an abusive family in my own neighborhood. I have been making calls for 3 years as well. Okay? It's not always up to us how the justice system approaches abusers, Nancy, and you know that.
Blogger that gives millions of people parenting advice. Where were you, Franke family, when she was duct taping her children and starving them? Where were you when she was keeping them hidden in the house? Now you want her in jail? Day late, dollar short. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. Thank you for being with us here at Fox Nation and Sirius XM 111. This now notorious mommy vlogger, you believe she is telling all of us how to raise children? You know, I learned that police or DFACS would go to the home and the children would actually hide. They wouldn't speak to the teachers or the school detectives that tried to find out what was going. And you know what? Shame on them, not the children, but the cops, DFACs, and school detectives who didn't follow up. When you have a child that basically hides from you, when you're asking it a simple question, there's something horribly wrong. But they just dropped the ball. And it resulted in a little boy starved, bound with duct tape, sneaking out and running to a neighbor's home to try to get.
I really don't like the way that she has positioned this story, because clearly there were a lot of neighbors who were filing complaints, calling it into CPS. The family was doing it too. And but it's somebody else's family, Nancy. So it's not, there's only so much pushing you can do on a situation. You report it to the people you think are going to handle this situation, and they either will or won't. And in more cases than not, their goal is to keep the kids with their primary guardians, their primary parents. And so that is the major problem with the CPS system. And you have the platform where you could talk about the problems with that, rather than blaming the people who lived around the situation and tried to report it. You could actually be talking about the system that is failing children. And you're spending more time yelling at the people who actually made the phone calls to report the problem.
Something to drink and eat. Yeah. And then when Ruby Franke ends up in court, guess what she does? I hope you're sitting down. You may need to lay down for this. She actually blames her children and said that at least one of them started watching porn when he was 3 years old, and that they're molesting each other.
Why didn't you pause on that and say, how did a 3-year-old get access to porn? How did a 3-year-old get access to porn? And why would a 3-year-old even search that out? Like, I mean, I raised a son. He did not have tablets and cell phones and shit at age 3. He basically had a computer that was offline that had computer games on it. Like learning games. Educational games. How did they have access to the internet at 3? Like, shouldn't you be asking those questions, Nancy?
What? Oh, did they starve themselves too? And
if a 3-year-old is watching pornography and you're the mom, that's your fault.
Yes.
Hey, Me Too Mine. Thank you so much for that super sticker. Naomi, appreciate your support. That's awesome. We are 2 away from our goal. It's hard to know if the allegations she's making have any validity to them or not. They certainly need to be investigated, and they need to be dealt with accordingly. But she's not a trustworthy source. She's just not a trustworthy source of information. So it's hard to put too much stock into what she's saying.
And bind themselves with duct tape? Guys, let's just start at the beginning with a 911 call. Listen.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and we know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. He's hungry, and he's thirsty. I'm sitting outside with him on the front patio. And he asked us to call the police. So he's very afraid He's 12 years old.
Okay, and are the neighbors out of their home, or is anybody looking for them that you can see?
No. Our homes are far enough away. I'm not sure. How did you get out of the house?
Porch.
He says you just left through the porch at the neighbor's house. Her name is Jody Hildebrant. I think Cayenne and the houses are far apart, so he walked just under a block to get to our house. He rang my doorbell and asked me to call the police.
So it's my understanding with me, an incredible panel, but first to Emily Ashcroft, reporter, KSL.com in Utah. Emily, thank you for being with us. From what I'm deciphering from the 911 call, I'm sure we'll learn exactly the answers to all of these questions, is that the little boy wanted them to call 911. He's 12 years old and he's very afraid, emaciated, and bound with duct tape.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. He tried to get out, and that is a good strategy, to go to a neighbor's home and ask for emergency help in this situation.
This kid must have been so afraid to run to a neighbor's and beg them to call 911. Let's listen to more of the 911 call to find out what else we can learn.
His ankles are taped up, and he won't tell us why.
Okay.
But he has duct taped around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around them. I think there's a good chance he's been... and he has been around his ankles. I mean, his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
Praise God that he ended up at the house that he ended up at, because this is a very compassionate man who was willing to do whatever it took to do the right thing. And instead of saying this, an alternative way that this could have played out would have been like, oh, let me just go check with your mom about what's going on or whatever. You get what I'm saying?
I mean, I've considered it myself. Like, if he showed up on my doorstep, and I would have called 911, but I would have been scared that it was a trap. This is so terrifying that this happened to these kids. And yeah, a lot of people who are not involved, you'd be a little bit scared to get involved because you don't know are you being set up for something? Like, I can't even imagine if, like, one of the kids from the family that I see being abusive with their kids in my neighborhood, if they showed up on my doorstep, I don't know how I'd react, because I'd be a little afraid that I'm being set up for something.
And he just listens to the boy. Hey, will you call 911? And so he's like, okay, I'll call 911. And you can tell he hasn't even had time to process everything, because it's like, hey, there's duct tape. And then that's the most heartbreaking thing about this, is you hear him in real time processing the reality of the situation. He starts crying and saying, this boy's been detained. And it's a horrifying reality. But praise God that he ended up at that house, because an alternative would have been he goes into, he takes her back to the mom, or even calls the cops. So just grateful for that. Catherine, thank you so much for helping us get across the threshold on our train this hour. Amazing.
Okay. Let's get the paramedics headed over that way, okay?
Oh, that's a good idea, too.
Let's see. Has he told you where his mom or dad are?
You know where your mom is?
I really got these things. Well, actually, I don't know where my mom is, but I do know where my dad is. He's not anywhere here. No. Nowhere.
Okay. No, he doesn't seem to. He says he knows where his mom is, but
He doesn't know where.
He said he knows, he doesn't know where his mom is, but he knows where his dad is. That's what he said. And the man who's helping him misheard him. I've listened to this call about 4 times now. He said he knew where his dad was. So what the fuck, Kevin? What the fuck, Kevin?
Where his dad is.
So much to figure out right there. I want to go to Shelly Asher. Listen to all these initials. BSN, RN, NY, SAFE, SANE-P.
What?
Sex assault forensic nurse examiner. I know that much. Forensic nurse expert with Godoy Medical Forensics, extensive background in pediatric physical and sex assault. Shelby Asher, thank you for being with us. Did you hear the male 911 caller break down in tears saying he's got duct tape around each ankle, around his wrist, and there's sores around them? That means, in my mind, he's been duct taped for a long time, if now there are sores forming.
Yeah, absolutely, Nancy. You know, I wouldn't be shocked. It really, you know, there are some dependent factors. Depends, like you said, how long they've been there, how tight these were on his extremities. But yeah, generally, I'd expect to see, you know, some patterned injury, meaning ligature-like marks around, in this case, his ankles and wrists. I definitely expect to see abrasions, lacerations due to, you know, the shearing of the skin in those areas.
What do you mean by shearing of the skin?
You know, the top layer kind of rubbing off, like an abrasion, just from that friction of having that bound his ankles and wrists.
I'm just thinking about this little boy and his little sister that was back in the home. Listen to more of that 911.
You know where his dad is. He doesn't live.
he just says he doesn't live around here.
Okay.
Is your mom around here? Have you seen her lately?
No, 50%.
He doesn't know where she is right now. What's your mom's name?
Busy.
Ruby Franke. Ruby Franke is his mom's name. Franke. He says what's happened to him is his fault.
Oh dear. They're coming to you as quick as they can, okay?
Even that 911 dispatchers are trained not to really show any emotion. They're just supposed to stick to the facts. And so when this young man says, "It's my fault this happened," she says, "Oh dear."
Yeah, seriously. If you have a 12-year-old who thinks that it's acceptable punishment to be bound by duct tape for any period of time, not even just extended period of time, that means that his mother approved of it. His father probably approved of it, because he said he knew where his father was. And obviously Jody was the person detaining him at her house. So they're all complicit. And they trained up their kids, they coached up their kids to think that this is normal. It's not normal. It's not fucking normal. And I hope all 3 of them rot in prison. Take it in.
I don't know. It's just not easy to talk about this case. Amy Heights, thank you so much for that amazing super sticker. That's what I'm saying. Even the 911 person was emotional.
Okay, yeah.
Really well. I just want to make sure.
He's fine. I've got him sitting here. My wife, he got him water and something to giving him something to eat because he's hungry, and I think the young man, he's hearing his stocking feet. So he escaped.
Does he have anything with him?
No, he's wearing a long sleeve shirt and shorts, and it's way too big for him.
Can you tell me what color the shirt and shirt?
Okay, the ambulance is here.
Joining me, thank goodness, is a forensic psychologist.
And you know, like, I mean, the thing is too that they were broadcasting all of this. There was at least thousands. You know, oftentimes you'll have like more followers than are actually watching your videos. But they at least had hundreds of thousands of viewers watching this and reporting it and signing a petition to try and save these kids who think that this is normal because that's what their parents taught them. This is so heartbreaking. It's so gross. I mean, they are lucky to be alive. They are lucky to be alive. It's shocking that she did this to her kids and that Kevin approved of it. He enabled her. That Jody was the catalyst for creating additional torture for these kids. And these poor kids are going to have to go through therapy for the rest of their lives.
Psychologist and consultant at psychologydoctor.com, Dr. Dana Anderson. Dr. Dana, thank you so much for being with us. It really struck me when you can hear the little boy saying in the background, living separate, they're divorcing. My dad is, quote, nowhere. He doesn't know where his mom is. And even more striking, he says, this is his fault. It's his fault that he is starving with his bones poking out. It's his fault he's covered in wounds. And nobody's really telling us what those wounds are. But I do know that there are open sores associated with the duct tape on the wrists and the ankles.
And scars. So it's not like this was just recent. This has been going on for some time. He had scars too.
And at one point I read across his body, which I'm taking to mean the waist or the chest in some manner. I know those are wounds. Other accounts say open wounds. But he says it's all his fault.
We cannot even handle thinking about it like that.
He's 12.
Okay, you know what? If someone asked my children right now, where is your mom? They would say she's in the studio. I wouldn't have to tell them where I am. They know where I am. And I know where they are. According to where I left them this morning, and according to Life 360, which I monitor constantly, if someone asked my children, where's your dad right now? They would say he's at his office. We know where each other is supposed to be. So, one, he doesn't know where his mom is. He doesn't know where his dad is. He says dad is nowhere. And he thinks all of this is his fault. His fault. You know, it reminds me of battered women. It's always their fault. They're getting the hell beat out of them. Sometimes the life beat out of them. When I worked at the Battered Women's Center, I remember when one woman got a horrible beating that landed her in the hospital. Her husband said he wanted Mexican for dinner. She made tacos, and he beat her because she made enchiladas. Wait, he wanted tacos, she made enchiladas, something like that. But she thought that was her fault. So help me out here, Dr. Dana.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking to hear that 911 call and just putting myself in his position. That boy, you know, is brainwashed, just like you said, like battered woman syndrome, just that battered syndromes over and over. They're being led to believe that it's their fault, that there's something wrong with them, that something that they're doing that they need to stop, and that's why they're being abused, and that's it. They have to rationalize the punishment. And then this is what you often hear in victims who have just been beaten down emotionally and psychologically over time. They try to cope and rationalize, make sense of it. It's so confusing to your brain why this is happening. So they can say, well, it's my fault. If I wouldn't have done that, if I could have done better, but I did this. And
why do people do that? Why do they think it's them? Like, oh, my husband cheated. That's my fault because I'm overweight. No, it's not. It's not your fault that he did that.
If you isolate a victim for so long, and isolation is what's happening in this case, and you only have that authoritarian figure telling you, it's like brainwashing.
Okay, I've got a theory, Dr. Dana. What about this? You can't accept that the person you love so much is a monster. Okay, here's an example. A friend told me about an acquaintance that shot his dog with a BB gun repeatedly.
Why?
And the dog kept crawling toward the owner. The dog, that's the only thing the dog knew. This is who feeds me. This is where I sleep. This is my, I guess, master. And even though the guy was shooting him with a BB gun, the dog would crawl toward the owner. And I've never understood.
She uses a great analogy. It's like if you guys pay attention to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and even just when you're born into a house, you feel like you have to listen, obey, and respond to people who have taken care of some of your needs. They give you food. They give you shelter sometimes. So
yeah, obviously not all the time.
She's talking about a dog being shot by its owner and the dog crawling back to the owner. Same thing about these kids. It's heartbreaking. I think we're going to go to 17 on this super sticker train. Miss Michelle says it's so heartbreaking. Prayers for this boy and his siblings. Amen, Miss Michelle. I have been praying for them often. Jennifer Swain says, wait, don't leave me. You're all aboard, Jennifer Swain. Thank you for joining us. 2, got 15 seats left for anybody who wants to help us.
Understood that. And when I'm thinking about this, how awful it must be for a little child, a baby, to accept the mom has left me alone. The mom is starving me. The mom bound me. I don't know where she is. I don't know where my dad is. And so they blame themselves. Because sometimes that's easier to blame yourself than to accept your whole world's falling apart. The one person you love hates you.
It's so terribly conflicting because this is also the mother, the person that's supposed to be nurturing or has nurtured you at times. This is the person that's supposed to feed you and has before. They need that person. They're reliant on them, as babies or children are, on their parents.
This poor kid, his whole world falling apart. Well, the little boy says, my sister's still back in this home. So the cops finally show up and do something instead of looking in the window and see the children cowering and do nothing. Take a listen to our friends at KUTV.
The neighbor clearly moved to tears.
This boy has been... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
Once officers arrived, this is what they discovered inside Hildebrand's home.
There's a panic room inside the garage, downstairs underneath the garage.
Yeah, some of that audio you just heard is when law enforcement appeared to be trying to find some of the boys' siblings.
Okay, who is this person, Hildebrant. Emily Ashcraft with us, KSL.com. You're
What when you saw this image of her, obviously it's not a great picture of her. She probably thought it was a great photo because she had likely posted that's how it's available on the internet. It looks like a selfie. Instantly seeing her picture, you get the heebie-jeebies, at least I did. Hey, Patty DeVilla and Me Too Mind Me. Appreciate you guys hopping aboard. Jackie Lynn Troll says, I'm a foster parent and see stuff like this very often. It just kills me.
There's another interview out there with a fellow who had a case against the Boy Scouts. He was molested as a 14-year-old, and he and his father worked to change the legislation in Idaho because the statute of limitations was only 5 years. So they were trying to get it extended out because the statute of limitations for rape normally in Idaho is 50 years. But for kids, it's only 5, right? So they worked on that. And the Mormon church somehow inserted a woman into his life that he ultimately married and had 2 children with, and he went to Jody Hildebrant for marriage counseling, and she was absolutely trying to separate them, call him a sexual deviant. She said she set up that panic room because he was stalking her. So that's a very interesting interview. It's long if you have the time for it. But it sounds like this guy got targeted by the Mormon church because he was calling out some shit about child abuse in Boy Scouts, and the Mormon church is highly involved in Boy Scouts. I know this for a fact in my own neighborhood because some of the activities that we did when my son was involved in Cub Scouts involved going to Mormon facilities for meetings.
I cannot believe it took this long to stop it. Well, bless you and thank you for being a foster parent. I feel like Christians do need to be foster parents if possible, if they're in a life situation that allows them to be, and it would really solve some problems that are happening in our culture, and they should adopt too. I think I read this stat that's like if every church in America had 2 families become a foster parent and adopt, it would end the foster care system. And so I'm always really moved and touched by people who do that. So thank you, Jackie Lynn, for doing that. And it is heartbreaking to see this kind of thing happen. It is absolutely heartbreaking.
You have to realize, though, that not everybody has good intentions when they're getting involved in foster care because they actually are receiving payments. They're getting state payments for caring for the child. And so some people are doing it just for financial reward. And that's why you end up with people like Jody Hildebrant who really don't give a shit about kids. And she thought she could get away with this. She thought she could get away with this. And the only reason that they got caught is because that man, his 911 call was very convincing. It was very trustworthy. It made sense, right? That this child was being seriously abused. And that's why they sent like something like 20 officers to Ruby Franke's house.
Thank you for that super chat. What do you guys, when you look at this Hildebrant, what comes to your mind? I mean, it's just sad to me. Hey, Catherine Joy, thank you for that amazing super sticker. I'm heartbroken watching this.
Saying that you believe Jody Hildebrant was a marriage counselor to Ruby Franke and her husband, who was, quote, nowhere. Is that right?
That's what family has said. So that's kind of the initial how they met, and eventually she moved into their Springville home, and then
who moved into whose home?
Jody Hildebrant moved into the Franke home for a little, or was at least staying there for a little bit.
So Emily Ashcroft, let me understand this.
Wait, I think you're getting that backwards. I'm fairly certain that Ruby was going down to Jody's home. I think you're getting that backwards, but maybe you have information I don't know about. But honestly, allegedly, my assumption, it sounds like these two had some sort of lesbian relationship going on.
Jody Hildebrant, we believe, was a marriage counselor to vlogger mom with over 2 million followers, Ruby Franke. Mm-hmm. She then became a friend, moved into the Franke home for a period.
Why do all the marriages that she's counseling end up in divorce? Why do they all end up separated? Like, what the hell is happening here?
Time, and then it looks like became her co-host on Connections, a kind of an offshoot of 8 Passengers. 8 Passengers was Ruby Franke's show, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So more recently, that's the YouTube channel that they've been running, and they have an Instagram together called Moms of Truth.
Oh, dear Lord in heaven. Okay, I'll tell you what.
Exactly, dear Lord in heaven, we need to be praying for them. Let me see if that Instagram account still exists. Moms of Truth, Jody and Ruby. 335,000 followers?
Mm-hmm.
Followed by Chewbacca Mom. I might message Chewbacca Mom and see.
I don't know where you're looking.
Oh my gosh.
YouTube or Twitter. X.
Oh my gosh. I'll show you guys that Instagram account eventually when I want to get through this Nancy Grace episode first. But it's shocking.
All right, let's get through it.
I know about this friend, co-anchor Jesse Hildebrant speaks out. This is Jody Hildebrant's niece. I want you guys to take a listen, if you can stand it, to our cut 78. This is Jody Hildebrant, the marriage counselor, describing what happened to her. Listen.
I was forced to sleep outside in the snow. I was, like I said, isolated for up to 12 hours a day. If someone spoke to me directly, if I wasn't wearing duct tape on my mouth, I had to just stare at them and not respond, because she also had systems of people that would report back to her if I broke any of these rules. And her whole thing, which is deeply, darkly ironic, is that everything stems from shame, and how horrible shame is, and that all of the reason, like all of mental illness, all tics, so like OCDs, addiction, everything stems from shame, which is just horrifying, because she is the greatest perpetuator of shame.
And this is who Ruby Franke has with her children? Okay,
Wait,
also
what?
on our panel is...
Nancy, what are you doing? What are you doing? Jessie did an interview like last week, and her abuse happened in 2012. We're talking like 10 years ago. What are you doing, Nancy? Her abuse happened like 20 fucking years ago, and what are you, victim blaming at this point? Like, Jessie was experiencing the same level of abuse that these other young children were facing. She was a teenager when it happened. And she's speaking out now because she has a platform at this point. What are you doing? God damn it, Nancy Grace. I can't even with this chick.
Executive Director, Utah Crime Victims Legal Clinic. It's a nonprofit who represents the victims. Former county prosecutor Heidi Nestle is with us. Heidi, thank you so much for being with us. So the children are starved. They are covered in open wounds. They are duct taped, at least at the wrist and the ankles, and quote, across the body. The little boy says dad's divorcing. He's quote, nowhere. I don't know where mommy is. And they're in this home with this woman who's, I guess, her.
He totally didn't say that. He said he knew where his father was. He said he didn't know where his mother was. What are you doing? There is no point on the phone call that he says dad's divorcing. Because he hasn't even said that. He's still saying Kevin walked into their home a couple days after this happened with his wedding ring on. What do you just like make shit up, Nancy?
Theory is to shame people into a certain behavior. What happened? I know there have been many calls to this home. Why are the children still there?
They're not.
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, these are the most serious physical charges.
They've been removed from the home, Nancy. Oh my God, even. They are in foster care. Nobody knows where they are right now. It's not being disclosed. They are not in the home. What are you even talking about? Do you just like spew misinformation on your show? What the hell?
These charges that we have in Utah, what they've been charged with. And so it makes sense that this did not just happen overnight. This abuse was going on for a long time. And it does call into question, you know, who saw what, especially as far as Ms. Hildebrant is concerned. The reason she's been charged for the exact same crimes is
they're literally having custody hearings, Nancy. You're supposed to be this person who knows all about the court cases, and you can't follow it closely enough to know that they're actually going through custody hearings right now? For real? Oh my God.
Because in Utah, we have accomplice liability. That if you aid or encourage someone to commit a crime, that's as if you're committing the crime yourself. And so it's appropriate that.
By the way, Jody Hildebrant, I just looked on her website, charges $175 per 50-minute session with her. $175 for a 50-minute session where she will train you on how to be a better mother.
How to abuse your kids.
She needs to pay back every single person who's ever paid her for mother training 10x.
That she's been charged and likely will be held accountable for these atrocious crimes.
You know, Jason Jensen is with me. I agree with everything Heidi Nestle just said, Jason Jensen. Jensen, private investigator, owner, Jensen Private Investigations, co-founder of the Cold Case Coalition, and you can find him at jensenprivateinvestigations.com. Don't you see a similar transaction happening? You've got the adult niece of Jody Hildebrant saying, I wasn't allowed to speak to anybody. I had duct tape on my mouth. And now we see these children bound in duct tape. What about that, Jason Jensen?
I'm not surprised. I mean, clearly from what
How can you sound so calm? I'm just curious. I'm not surprised. I'm surprised as hell. And I see it every day. But the hypocrisy of this woman being a mommy vlogger, look, I do the best I can with the children. I do. And I know I'm not an expert. And it would be a cold day in HELL that I try to give parenting advice. I want people to give me parenting advice.
Honestly, I don't even know why you covered this woman's bullshit, because Nancy Grace has been a problem for decades. And I mean, the kind of coverage that she does of these cases is obviously ill-informed. She thinks the kids are still in the house. They're not. They're in protective custody at this point, and they are going through a custody battle over who is going to get to take care of these kids. And there's obviously a lot of doubt in Kevin as well, because he was a part of this for the 3 years that they were getting complaints. Nancy is just a dramatic fool who just yells a lot on TV. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She clearly hasn't done her research.
And her children are duct taped. They're starved, Jason Jensen.
Well, yeah, I'm shocked.
Where's
but
the
reason
outrage?
Why, probably because I'm not going to disrupt your show by personally being emotional about
that
it.
That makes me feel better about you. You're trying to save crime stories. Okay, go ahead.
Exactly. So basically, the reason why I say I'm not surprised is this came out of somewhere in her past. It wasn't just something they invented. So clearly this is something that she's been cultivating and using in her past, I guess, therapy sessions, which clearly is, in my definition, cruel and unusual for what she's, using against her own family members, let alone, the Franke family. What she put these kids through is cruel, it is torturous, and it is criminal. So it's going to be hard for them to justify. And then, for what Ruby Franke tried to raise in her hearing as the excuse for it is abhorrent.
Guys, you're not going to believe what you're going to hear next. It's not just Ruby Franke. It's not just Jody Hildebrant. The system had a hand in this. Brad Watts is joining me. Listen to this, Brad. Our cut 6061 from KSL.
Records reveal officers responded to Franke's home in Springville 15 times between March 2019 and last week. In April 2022, records show DCFS asked Springville PD to drive through the neighborhood. In September last year, Franke's oldest daughter asked police to check on her younger siblings after hearing from neighbors that Franke had left them home alone in Springville for days. According to police records, the kids were seen through the windows but would not answer the door. But neighbors told officers Ruby Franke would leave her children home for extended periods of time and go to St. George to spend time with her friend, Jody Hildebrant. Records show police went back to the Springville home 4 more times after that to assist DCFS.
But nothing was done.
That's what I don't understand. It feels like for sure nothing was done. Hey, Me Too Mine, you said, God bless. Catherine Joy, you guys are amazing.
Yeah, seriously, if you're separated from your husband, you're now potentially having a lesbian relationship with Jody. Why didn't you just call Kevin and ask him to come over and watch the kids? Is it because that's not part of the Mormon lifestyle? Was it embarrassing? Was it embarrassing to be spending so much time with this woman? Right? Going down there, doing whatever you're doing, getting your jollies off by torturing your kids. And you didn't want to call him to babysit while you were gone, right? Is that where we're going here? Because you didn't want him to have dirt on you? Is that where we're going? I mean, allegedly.
Thank you. And it sounds like the praying emojis, praying. God bless. Thank you, Catherine Joy, as well. We're going after 17 super stickers. That was number 8, which means we have 9 more seats available.
And when school members tried to speak to them, nothing was done. Nothing at all. So the children continued to starve and be bound. That's not all. Take a listen to our friends at KSL. This is Shelby Lofton.
Neighbors told me everyone noticed the Frankie's windows being covered in paper earlier this year. We drove by the Frankie's house today. No one looked like they were home, but the front door, which looks like it's cracked, is covered in several strips of black tape. Neighbors told us Kevin Franke, Ruby's husband, moved out of the family home about 1 year ago. Kevin Franke is now back at that address.
So, Brad Watts, licensed professional counselor, certified sex offender treatment provider, specializes in sibling sex abuse. And I want to talk to you about Ruby Franke's claims that it's all her children's fault that they're abusing each other. He's the author of Sibling Sex Abuse, America's Silent Epidemic, and you can find him at Brad Watts L.
I think it's important to say that that's alleged. That we don't know that Russell actually did anything to Eve, or anybody else. We don't know, because it was never reported to authorities, and he was never taken to a therapist. So, Ruby's accusations against her 12-year-old son, who was bound, starved, and has lacerations on his body. We have no idea whether or not her allegations against him are actually true. So she could be completely defaming her child to try and save her own ass, which I don't even know how it would save her own ass, because as a parent, if you do have a child that is that disruptive, you're responsible for taking care of that situation. You are responsible for putting that child in therapy, like actual therapy, not Jody Hildebrant therapy. Like therapy that would actually deal with his real problems. You are responsible for reporting these crimes to the police, and that never happened. So it's hard to believe if this actually happened, or if it was just an excuse to torture her kid.
PC.com. Brad, what do you make of the fact that police didn't help, DFACS didn't help, the school detective and counselors, they didn't help, and the neighbors, they all noticed, they all knew something was wrong, but they did nothing.
Nancy, this is just mind-blowing. I mean, one of the first things that popped out to me, excuse me, is the fact that they didn't do their due diligence on anything. It's a complete failure. And I would think just anybody kind of around or familiar, you make those calls and then you go in and investigate in the home. And the fact that all these different opportunities that they dropped the ball on this is just really horrific. And you know, we see the results with the kids. I can't help but wonder, with all these different calls, all these different people, you know, seeing red flags from the family, why in the world this wasn't investigated. So I'd really be interested to hear what their excuses for this is.
Denying the children food and care, leaving them alone for days. If this woman wasn't famous, you don't think she would have been arrested by now? All you have to do is listen to.
Do you think because she was famous, that's why she wasn't arrested? Or because she had money and was wealthy and it created a false illusion? I'm not saying it was implicit bias, but there was a level of bias that went.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a matter of influence. It's a matter of money. It's a matter of, like, what neighborhood do you live in? You know, how big is your house? I agree with you.
They went into a home that's extremely clean when they were trying to figure out what was going on. She's playing a puzzle with her daughter. There seems to be joy. They have no problem with not having enough, because I think a lot of times these investigators are going into homes, there's not running water. I mean, the houses don't even meet the minimum standard.
Right.
And so they walk into this house, and it's like this amazing house. It's, $2 million house, and there, 6 bedrooms and basements, and so they're playing puzzles, and it's super clean, and everybody seems to be a little bit happy. And so there's a little bit of a bias that happens in that situation, is what I think probably took place. Hey, Vinny the Pooh, Naomi, thank you. We have 7 seats left on our super sticker train.
To her, on her 8 passengers are now the new connections with her hench person, Jody Hildebrant. Take a listen to Ruby Franke on 8 passengers.
I just got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children, because I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch.
Ruby, it's not just that she's uncomfortable. She's a mandatory reporter. So if you are neglecting your child's needs, she has to report that to the authorities because she's a teacher. Goddamn stupid bitch.
But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack.
She's 6. You are responsible for packing her lunches.
Lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry, and hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch. And my kids are.
Put a 1 in the chat if you would do that to your 6-year-old. And especially when the teacher calls you to let you know what took place. I could see it unintentionally happening where you're like, hey, she said she packed her lunch and she didn't. And it's not like Ruby Franke, had 42 meetings that she had to get to. She's sitting around home. She's a mommy vlogger. How's she vlogging without her kids even home as a mommy vlogger? So she's just sitting around waiting on them to get home anyways. And so the school...
Yeah, she literally has no other job. And so, I'm sorry, you don't have time for this? You don't have time to feed your child? And that's like your entire income is exploiting your children, right? But you can't feed them? Okay, Ruby.
School calls and says, can you please bring your daughter a lunch? And she's like, no. And I hope nobody helps her. Now, who's watching that would let your 6-year-old go without a lunch, especially after the school calls and informs you of what's going on? Put a 1 in the chat. If you think it's the most absurd, dumbest thing you've ever heard in your entire lifetime, put a 2 in the chat, because that's certainly what I'm putting in the chat.
Are literally starving. I hesitate to say this because it's going to sound like I'm like a mean barbarian, but I told the kids, I said, I'm not even going to let you eat breakfast until you get your chores done.
You're the mother and she is the child. This is not a relationship where you trust her. That's not your job as a mother. In fact, your job as a mother is to constantly be scrutinizing her, to constantly be judging her choices against principles.
No, bitch. Your job is to read bedtime stories, make sure that they get bathed on a daily basis, that they're brushing their teeth, that they are fed, that they're doing their homework, and that they're going to school. And it seems like you failed on every goddamn level of that. You pulled them out of school because you didn't want the oversight of mandatory reporters, right? You stopped feeding them, and you used them as content for your YouTube channel to exploit them online while you made millions of dollars, which you are bragging about. How much did you put into trust accounts for them? Since they were working on this program too, right? You were constantly pulling them up, interviewing them, using them as part of your content. So how much money did you put aside for them, Ruby?
was Ruby Franke speaking on a podcast late last year for Connections, a life coaching platform founded by her business partner, Jody Hildebrant.
There at the end, you're hearing our friends at KUTV and, you know, Dr. Dana. All I can think about is my son and my daughter, John, David, and Lucy, how hurt they would be if I spoke to them that way. If I denied them, if they didn't have food, and I said, no, you're not eating. You forgot to fill in the blank. If I treated my daughter...
And it goes both ways. Like, I was very careful with how I did food for my son, because you can't force them to overeat. Otherwise, they'll have issues with eating. So you put the food out. This is what we're having tonight, right? And they eat as much as they can. If they don't finish their plate, not a big deal. It's just fucking food, right? But you definitely offer them the food at you know, all of the meal periods and snack times and all that. Like, I carried snacks with me constantly as a, you know, as when he was younger. I was constantly carrying snacks with me. I can't even imagine doing this to a child. It's this woman is absolutely nuts.
This way, my job, what, to constantly be scrutinizing her and judging her choices? What? Who are these people? I was struck by the fact that she found, the little girl that wasn't having any food that day was 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was also struck when she refused to let some of the children have Santa on Christmas morning.
Dude, I would have, literally, if I had found out that he, like, left his lunch behind, like, say I packed it for him, it was still in the fridge or something like that, I would have dropped in on, like, In-N-Out or Wiener Schnitzel and, like, drove up to the school with some fast food for him. I can't even imagine doing that to my child.
Nicholas and I are cut 28.
So we sat down with them and we let them know how deeply sorrowful we've been because of the choices that they've been making and how it's affected their teachers at school. It's affected their peers. It's affected our home, the siblings. And we just laid it out very clear. And we told them that this year they are not going to be visited by Santa. We let them know that Christmas morning, their 4 older siblings will be getting Christmas presents to open, and that they will have the gift of love from their dad and I.
Yeah, I wonder why he left. But that...
Yeah, you know what? That is so fucking cruel, especially the younger kids. Like, if it's the older kids and you're like, hey, you know what? You really fucked up and you're a teenager. That might make a little bit more sense to have some sort of punishment. But these are your 6 and 8-year-olds, right? That you are denying presents because they were so bad, right? I think I talked about this on one of my other videos, that there were times when I got coal in my stocking, and it was very hurtful because I was young when it happened. There were times, there was a Christmas when my brother opened up a bunch of presents and I had none under the tree, and I was told that my mom ran out of money and my presents were coming on King's Day. These things leave lasting mental scars. You know? It's not cool to try and value your children at different levels. Not okay. Like, if you're too poor to do Christmas presents one year, then you you confiscate it for everybody. But that is obviously not the case because she was bragging about being a millionaire. So
That said, he didn't just leave her. He left his children to starve in a hellhole. Back to Emily Ashcroft joining us, KSL. So I understand that Ruby Franke, this famous mommy vlogger, appeared in court. And in court, she somehow shifted all the blame. Did she not? Ruby Franke actually appears in court and astonishingly blames her own children for their suffering, even claiming that her children watched porn at age 3 and that one child molested many other children. Sex molest.
ask the question, Nancy. Ask the question, Nancy. How did that happen? How did they get access to porn? How was she aware of, if this is even true, which I don't believe it is, 20 victims of her 12-year-old without reporting it to the police or taking him to a legitimate therapist, not a bondage torture therapist?
Did them. Listen to our friends at Crime Online.
Shocking stories continue to follow Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrant as family members speak out and share their personal frustrations with the women. But the most shocking thing so far has to be from Ruby Franke herself. The Daily Mail reports that in court, Ruby Franke sobbed as she appeared for a shelter hearing for minor children to determine custody. Speaking between sobs, the mother of 6 claims that one of her minor children sexually abused their sibling and molested several other family members and children in the neighborhood for years.
I find that really difficult to believe. And I'm going to go to...
Well, it's even more difficult to believe because when she was pressed for evidence, she couldn't give any. She was unable to actually provide any evidence for her claims on this. And you, Nancy Grace, as a reporter, a court reporter, should be asking these questions.
Our expert, Brad Watts, who has written Sibling Sex Abuse, America's Silent Epidemic. If this had been going on for years, it's very hard for me to believe that a neighbor had not reported it. I would be lying on the police HQ steps screaming for justice if a neighbor attacked one of my children, a neighbor child. Yeah, I don't believe this for 1 minute, especially given the other circumstances that the children are starved, bound with duct tape, and have open sores.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. The thing is, like, even if he was that much of a sexual deviant, which I don't believe, because this seems to be Jody Hildebrandt's MO, is that she accuses all of the victims that come to her for counseling as somehow bringing it upon themselves, and they are the problem, right? So she brainwashes them into believing that they've committed some level of crime, and therefore that's based on like all of the videos I've been watching. It seems like that is how that, and she lost her license in 2012. Why was she still working with people at this point? So she's brainwashing these poor kids into thinking that they are sexual deviants. And the question is, what was happening in the home? Like, how did... First of all, I don't believe it. I don't believe that a 3-year-old was looking at porn. I don't believe it. Because I don't even think a 3-year-old would even understand what they were looking at.
Nancy, absolutely. There's all kinds of red flags that just incongruent with everything in the home. It doesn't appear in any way that would happen, in my opinion. Just because, one of the red flags to me is a 3-year-old looking at porn. So she's presenting it as her 3-year-old child is seeking out porn. Well, a 3-year-old's not able to seek out porn on their own. They would come across it, or it'd be shown to them. And then just with the strict abusive nature in her home, how is that happening? And I agree with you, how is a neighbor, if he's doing it to all these family members, all these different neighborhood kids, in my experience, it gets reported, it's talked about, it's brought up. And then she's just keeping that, to herself and all that. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it at all in any experience I've had.
It doesn't make any sense to me. Heidi, no.
Just is weird timing for her to say it. If it's true or not, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Experts on the panel are saying it doesn't make sense. It should be looked into, but it's classic deflection, and it does look worse on her if she knew about it and didn't resolve it. And that doesn't give her permission to tie up her other children and leave them, with bruises either. You get what I'm saying?
It doesn't give her permission to tie up that child, to tie up the child that she's accusing of this behavior, because she is the mom in this situation. It's a 12-year-old kid. If he has some sort of level of problems, it's up to her to get him therapy for that.
None of it is making any sense at all.
Still is joining us from the Utah Crime Victims Legal Clinic. In all the years I have prosecuted and investigated child molestation, I've never in my life heard of a 3-year-old going to the TV and finding porn and watching it. That is a lie, Heidi.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, as your panelist just said, it either didn't happen or the child was presented with it or exposed to it by someone who is older and can make those kind of searches. This just doesn't make sense. The legal argument to say, I'm absolved from responsibility or my responsibility is mitigated because there was this sex abuse going into the home, that doesn't make sense legally to make that argument, because as the parent, you have a legal and moral responsibility to protect your children.
Exactly. That's exactly the case. Hey, Catherine Joy, thank you so much for that amazing super sticker. You too, Patty Davila. That takes us just 4 away from our goal. Just 4 away from our goal.
And in Utah, we have mandatory report laws. So if this had been going on, the parent is responsible at some level. And so it doesn't make sense legally for her to be making this argument. If anything,
that's why she pulled them out of school. She pulled them out of school because she realized that she was going to be reported to CPS. I'm just saying, allegedly, right? But the reality is that the only reason you would pull your child out of public education is because you're scared that you're going to get in trouble for your behavior. Right, Ruby?
Aggravates the situation as opposed to mitigating her liability.
I want you to hear what happened when a school resource officer attempted to speak to the children. Take a listen, hour cut 76.
A school resource officer attempting twice to talk to the children, once unsuccessfully at school and again later at home.
When he asked to talk to them, to the mom and the children, they all went in the house, locked the doors, and would not respond to any of our attempts for contact.
It's very concerning when we hear that there were this many people that sounded the alarm, that there might have been something happening at this home.
So you were hearing from our friends at GMA. So I'm not sure how this goes down. The school resource officer says he tried to speak to them, but Ruby Franke and her children all went in the home and just locked the door.
Bones Coffee. Bones has
that the children went silent when he tried to speak to them at school. So what, they just drop it Just okay, yeah, I can't talk to them. Never mind. That's over. Case closed. Also, Ruby Franke's home is covered.
Yeah, I don't understand why CPS didn't have probable cause at this point to actually make sure that the children were interviewed with, like a specialist who understands how to deal with kids who have been brainwashed and abused and so on and so forth. Because they got enough phone calls at this point. They had mandatory reporters. Um, I mean, sure, Ruby could be like, oh, this is trespassing. It's not trespassing if you have probable cause. And they could have gotten a warrant. Like, why didn't they do more? Why didn't they do more?
The windows are covered with paper. No one can get to them. They're locked in the home and no parent is home. But I find it really hard to believe. I'm going to throw this to you, Jason Jensen, that the school resource officer just dropped it because the mom wouldn't speak.
So, yeah, it's pretty well not uncommon. I mean, typically here in Utah, when a resource officer or a police officer tries to interview a child at the school, the child does have that ability to refuse to speak to the officer about something at home. Oftentimes it's because the child is instructed not to engage with any form of police officer or something like that.
It's not just a matter of instruction. It's a matter of, how will my life change? This is what I'm used to. If I'm pulled away from my home, am I going to end up in a worse situation? There's a lot of thoughts that go through kids' heads when they consider reporting abuse. And they're like, you know what? If I can just make it to 18. If I can just make it to 18.
School, so you would think that would pose a red flag for the investigator, but I've read many reports where that's actually occurred here.
But they just let it go. Guys, I want you to hear more of this mommy vlogger with millions of people taking her advice, Ruby Franke. Take a listen to Our Cut 95.
Go win. We are going to a movie, so go get on your shoes. What is it? What? Does it even matter? If someone asked me if I wanted to go to a movie, I wouldn't ask, what is it? Run and get your shoes or you're going to not go. Hurry.
Seriously, she could have been like, hey, let's go to the movie theater and look at what's playing and decide what we want to see. Right? She could have made that a pleasant experience. And if the start time isn't like right when we get there, we could go get a slice of pizza at the neighboring pizza parlor. You can literally make this let's have an adventure. But instead, she's making something that should be a fun experience for a child into basically torture. Like, what is wrong with you, Ruby?
Everyone run. Hey, this is Ruby. I was wondering, is Brooke available to babysit? Sorry.
Oh, God.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. What a good idea for spring break.
Mom, I'm really sorry.
I am not taking Eve, unless you come and give me a huge apology.
You know what?
It just hurts me to hear that.
At this point, she has already been turned down for babysitting. And so now she's making it out like, you have to give me this big apology because I offered to do something fun for you. You did not respond in the way that I wanted. And so therefore, and I couldn't get a babysitter, right? So Therefore, I'm going to torture you further and tell you that you have to acquiesce to me. You got to bend the knee. Bend the knee, Eve. Bend the knee.
A little baby. I mean, you can tell she's, what would you say, Jackie, 4 or 5, maybe? If that. Crying, saying, Mommy, I'm sorry. And now listen to this, 96.
You come give me a hug and you come say you're sorry. No, again, where I can pay attention. It was not very thankful of you. I was excited and I told you to go get on your shoes and your jacket to see a movie. And you should say, okay, and be grateful. Instead of, well, what movie? Well, I don't know. Let me think about it. That's not very grateful, and I'm not going to take a...
Regina says, Tyler, will you check on my autograph book? I haven't received it yet. Thanks. I will definitely check on that without a shadow of a doubt.
I can't even imagine this bullshit. Like, when I was raising my son, I did like an alien birthday party for him in the park. It didn't quite work out well because it was a little too hot, so the kids were they couldn't eat because it was too hot. They lost their appetites. But like I had a magician there. I did a Wild Rivers birthday for him. I was volunteering at all these places. I can't imagine being this kind of bitch who was just exploiting her children for YouTube content when my motherhood experience was reading Harry Potter to my son at night, and like taking care of him. I just can't even imagine this bullshit. By the way, it's my son's birthday today. He's 29.
Regina. Brittany J, are you on your other account? Don't you have 2 accounts? That's probably why it's gone. I don't know what happened. And sometimes it just cancels people's memberships, we found out. Thank you, Regina Austin, for that super chat. I'll definitely check on the status of that. By the way, guys, we are only 2 super chats away from reaching our goal.
The girl who's not grateful. Can you show some more gratitude? Okay, give me a big hug.
I mean, is that common to force your victim to apologize to you? Just trying to figure that out, Brad Watts.
No, I mean, it's so hard to listen to, Nancy. I mean, just, these children and the way she treats them. And, I keep thinking that with my therapist eyes, just this family and these kids and how much they need to be in therapy and all that they're going to have to work through. And again, kind of going back to your point, where's Dad? Fighting for these kids, getting them.
I think he needs to be behind bars too. He's responsible. You can't just drive off and leave your children with a demon from hell and then act like you had no responsibility at all. So when she is brought into court, and by the way, isn't it true?
You know what though? That is kind of like, by the way, dudes, take accountability for your children. I know this is kind of like a thing where you all are like, well, the mom's gotta have custody and therefore... No. You are a parent as well. You can't just fucking abandon the situation when it doesn't work out with your wife or your girlfriend or whoever else is the partner that you had that had these children with you. You can't just like blow it off and like disappear. Not cool. Not fucking cool. So she was abusing these children, and it got much more severe after you left the house, Kevin. How often were you visiting your kids? How often were you talking to them? Right?
Back to Emily Ashcraft, KSL. Is it her or Hildebrant that claimed that they have an ailment and they're on the sick the sick unit where they get better treatment?
What does that mean?
I think they've both had some medical issues since they've been in jail. So I think both of them, but most recently, Hildebrant apparently had some significant medical issues, and that was filed in court documents.
Mm-hmm. What issue?
Mm-hmm.
It was vague as to what those were, but it was.
I bet it was.
Very
I bet it was. Both of them amazingly get medical issues when they go behind bars, and they end up in a much better position in the sick bay. Guys, I want you to hear more of what Ruby Franke did, as if she hasn't victimized her children enough.
After 2 years of watching Ruby Franke promote herself as an expert at parenting, family members now feel it's time to speak out and set the record straight. To that end, Franke's sister-in-law Cynthia told the Daily Mail, quote, "I don't think she should get out on bail. I do believe the allegations against her. After all of this, she should be put away forever if convicted." Cynthia is the wife of Franke's older brother, Alan, and she said she had no idea what was going on behind closed doors. She said, quote, "I don't know what to believe from her. I think she's lying. She's putting the blame on her 2 kids to validate what she did to her children. At this point, I think she'll say anything to save herself."
To Shelby Asher joining us, a forensic nurse examiner. How often is it that I see children victimized while everybody stands by and twiddles their thumbs?
That's not what happened,
Brittany, if you want to come up on the panel for a couple minutes, I'm not streaming for very much longer, but for a couple of minutes, email me and I'll send you a link. Hey, Miss Michelle, thank you so much for that.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here because I already went like much longer than I should have to be able to clip this. And Nancy is so over the top with her bullshit. There were a lot of people trying to salvage this situation, Nancy. And that's just not how this system works right now. Like, you can report as much as you want about child abuse that you see. And it's up to the PD, it's up to Child Protective Services. I got hung up on when I was reporting something. Okay? There is a family that comes to the pool across the street from me who are throwing small children 8 feet in the air into a 5-foot deep pool. I have reported it several times over the last 3 years. Are you going to blame me that I wasn't doing enough? I have done so much that they call me the problem. So I don't know what to tell you, but like when we report child abuse, it is largely ignored, Nancy. So you need to stop blaming the people that were trying to fix the problem.